Someone asked me to make a top with holes like this. I actually didn't know how to do it either, so I had to do some research, but I finally figured it out. The structure of the top is kind of easy. It's a very boxy kind of shape, just a little bit decreasing here. This top is knitted, but you will be needing a crochet hook to work around the holes and also around the armholes as well. This one I'm making is size small, but this is made to measure. If you want your top to be longer, you just work more rows before making the first hole. And if you want it to be wider, because this is worked flat, meaning we're going to be making 2 panels. So if you want it to be wider, you just cast on more stitches here, so the top would be wider. And then you decrease here, and this is also adjustable. You can make it narrow like mine or wider. For this project, I used 8-ply yarn and 5mm knitting needles. I'll be using circular needles, but straight needles works too because we're only going to be knitting flat. I've had a few tries to get the bottom edge just the way I want it to be, and this is what it looks like. I cast on 60 stitches with this yarn to reach about half of my chest measurement, which is about 17 inches. I started with a knit row. The second row I did a purl row. And those 2 rows makes the first bump. Then I did purl knit 4 rows to make the stockinette stitch on the right side. Then I did 1 knit row, 1 purl row to make the second bump. And then from there, I just alternated between a purl row and a knit row to work the stockinette. So I worked about 4 inches to reach the underarm. Make sure you take notes of the row count for each section, so later it's easier to match up the front panel with it. The next part I started decreasing to form the armhole. At the beginning of the knit row, I knitted 1 stitch and then did an SSK. So you slip 1 stitch knitwise, slip the next stitch knitwise, and then knit them through the back loop. At the end of the row, when I have 3 stitches left, I knit 2 stitches together and then knit the last stitch. And on the purl side, I just purled every stitch. I didn't do any decrease. So I continued decreasing on the knit row and purled each row as usual until it got to the width that I wanted for the shoulder. I did 20 rows, so that's 1 knit row, 1 purl, 10 times. For the next section, I stopped decreasing and just knit the knits and purl the purls. With this at the underarm, I continued working straight up until I reached my shoulder. So this section, I initially did 30 rows, about 5 inches, but after trying it on, I decided to add another 10 rows. So after that, I cast off on the knit side. So to cast off, knit the first 2 stitches and then pass the first stitch over. Knit 1, pass over the one before. And at the end of the row, leave some length to sew up the shoulders later. Using this back panel, I marked out where I wanted the holes to be on the front panel. I started the front panel in the exact same way. I started making the first hole on the 5th row after the second bump. So visually it's this one when you have 3 rows below the needle. So I knitted the first 24 stitches of the next row and then cast off the following 2 stitches. So that's all I had to do for this row. The next row I purled each stitch to 2 stitches before the cast off stitches. Then I made an SSP decrease over those stitches. So slip both of the stitches knitwise, place them back on the left needle, and then purl them together through the back loop like so. So crossing to the other side, I needed a new ball of yarn. On this side, I need to make a mirrored decrease. To do that, I just purled the next 2 stitches together. On the knit row, I decreased as well. When I have 2 stitches before the hole, I knit 2 together. And then for the other side, switched yarn and did an SSK. So that was 2 rows of decrease. I did those 2 rows one more time. So that's 4 rows, purl, knit, decreasing every row. Then the following 6 rows are just plain rows. So purl, knit, no decrease. And then the next part I need to increase on both sides of the hole. So eventually we can join them together to complete the hole. The first increase row is on the purl side. I did a purl front back in that stitch before the hole. So that's purl the stitch and then purl the same stitch again through the back loop. So that's 2 stitches worked in 1 stitch. On the other side, I did the same increase, purl front back again. The increase on the knit side is knit from back in the stitch before the hole. So knit the stitch and then swing the needle around and knit through its back loop. In the next stitch, do the same thing. So this is the second increase row. And then did those 2 rows one more time. And then the next row, I joined the stitches together to form the hole. So after the last stitch, I cast on 2 stitches. With the yarn on the purl side, I continued using the same ball of yarn to work this row. I also tied the 2 yarns together so the stitches don't come undone. So that's how I made the hole. From next knit row, I also need to begin the decrease for the armhole as well. So this is the same as the back panel. I did 4 rows, knit, purl, knit, purl. I started the second hole in the following row. The second hole is at the center of the panel, so the 2 stitches that I cast off is the 2 stitches in the middle. I also continue decreasing for the armhole as well. The last row that I increased to create the hole is also the last row I decreased here. So from the next row, I stopped decreasing. On this row, I also need to cast on 2 stitches. I checked my stitch number here, it should be 40 stitches. The third hole, I also knitted the first 24 stitches before casting off the next 2 stitches. So after I completed the third hole, I split the stitches into 2, so I would have a larger opening for the neck hole. So that's 20 stitches for each side. For this part, I also needed 2 yarn balls and worked the 2 parts at the same time, back and forth like this. And then cast off the stitches separately on the knit side. I joined the side and the shoulder seams. For sewing, I used Mattress stitch. I'll link videos on how to do that. And then worked 1 round of single crochet around the armhole. I also used white yarn to crochet around the 3 circles as well. Horizontally, I worked in each column, and vertically, I worked in every other row. So first we need to leave a tail. The length of the tail depends on how many stitches you're going to cast on. Say if I want to cast on 10 stitches, I'm just going to wrap this yarn around the needle 10 times. So this is how long I need to leave the tail. You can always add a little bit more just to be safe. So this is the point where I need to make my slip knot. So I'm just gonna make a loop like this. Pull this yarn through the loop. And we've created a slip knot. Now we're going to insert our needle with the short end facing us. That loop counts as the first stitch. So now we're going to begin our cast on. So to cast on a stitch, I'm going to put my thumb and my index finger between the two threads and then hold the yarns down and then spread the two threads open. And then you flip your hand like this to create a slingshot. And then you can see we have two loops here. One is on the thumb, the other on my pointer. So this is the easiest way for me to look at them. Simply see them as two loops instead of 4 yarn threads. So first we're going to go through the thumb loop upward. That's up. And then go through the pointer loop. So first we're going to go through the thumb loop upward. That's up. And then go through the pointer loop downward. That is down. And then go through the thumb loop downward. Down. And then just pull the yarn down. So let's do that again. Between the threads, hold yarn down, slingshot, 2 loops. We're gonna go up, down, down. So 1 up, 2 down, and 1 down. One up, 2 down, and 1 down. So to knit a stitch, make sure you're working with the ball of yarn instead of the tail. I'm going to insert my needle in the first loop upward, like that. And then I'm going to grab my working yarn and wrap it around this working needle. Back, left, front. And then we're just going to use the working needle, pull the new loop through the old loop, like that. And then you want to take the old loop off the left needle. Just take it off. And we've completed a knit stitch. Insert in the next stitch, upward, and then create a new loop by wrapping your yarn around the working needle from back, left, front. And then pull it through the old loop. And then take the old loop off the needle like that. So to purl a stitch, always make sure the yarn is in front. So I'm going to get my needle behind my yarn like this. I'm going to insert my needle in this first loop downward. This is up, this is down. So insert it downward through the front loop, like so. And then I'm going to create a new loop by wrapping this yarn around the working needle. And then I'm going to pull this new loop through the old one on the other needle. And then I'm going to take the old loop off the needle. So we just did a purl stitch. With the yarn in front, let's do that again. Insert your needle in the next stitch, downward. Wrap yarn around the working needle from back, left, front to create a new loop, and then pull the new loop through the old loop, and then take the old loop off.